Today, I will talk to you about divorce and the horrifying and shocking physical, moral, and social consequences that women had to face in case of divorce during the Victorian era in England. Have you ever thought about the secret lives of divorcees in Victorian society? And can you ever imagine trying to end an unhappy marriage in a society where divorce meant providing adultery, cruelty, or desertion? Join me as we explore what it was like to get a divorce in the Victorian era. Hey guys! Welcome to Historical Gossip. In this channel, we do what humans have done best since we've evolved to be a super aware being. Gossiping! Viewer discretion is advised. This is an educational documentary. In the Victorian era, as we've seen in previous videos, marriage meant that a woman was considered property transferred from her father to her husband. Until 1857, wives were entirely subservient to their husbands, both economically and legally. All income, inheritance, or wages earned by a woman belonged to her husband. He also had control over her body, and at least until 1839, her children as well. Most marriages lacked love and were essentially convenience contracts in which the wife was expected to obey her husband and produce heirs in exchange for protection and security. Even in cases of adultery, abandonment, or cruelty, divorce was nearly impossible because it was too expensive. Only the wealthiest individuals could afford it, and it required a private act of the United Kingdom's Parliament. Furthermore, it was socially unacceptable, especially for the divorced woman, who not only lost her place in society but also her economic well-being and children. The children would typically continue to live with the father, who, as the head of the household, remained responsible for them. Consequently, infidelity was usually tolerated as long as it was discreet and well hidden. But what if two people wanted to separate, or if only one of them wanted to get rid of the other? In the best case, affluent, unhappily married couples could lead separate lives. The wife would go to live in the country estate or winter residence and had her own circles and acquaintances separate from her husband's, whom she rarely rejoined except for particularly prestigious occasions. However, there were also extreme alternatives such as leaving the marital home, murder, or wife selling. Murder was tolerated in cases of honor killings, where a man killed his wife for committing a serious action that affected the husband's image, honor, and respectability. A grave action such as adultery was considered more severe when committed by a woman, which humiliated the husband by giving someone else what belonged to him. Moreover, there was the danger of her having a child from the affair. On the other hand, a betrayed wife was simply seen as offended due to a rival. By law, a betrayed man could sue his wife's lover for damages, but the same was not granted to a betrayed wife. Some husbands used the excuse of honor killings to murder their wives, even if they were innocent, so they could be with their lovers. Another way a husband could separate from his wife was by selling her. It had been in practice in England since the late 1600s, had no legal basis, and typically led to a criminal proceeding. However, authorities were uncertain about how to handle such cases. There is written evidence of at least one magistrate stating that he did not believe he had the right to prevent a man from selling his wife. Although this behaviour was disapproved of and opposed by public opinion, it was prevalent among the lower class, which found in selling their spouses a means of earning money or a solution to an unhappy marriage. In the worst cases, women were sold by their husbands or guardians to brothels in exchange for money to gamble, buy alcohol, or clear their debts. Sometimes even local authorities advised the poor to sell their wives if they were unable to support the family, as it was considered better than overcrowding the workhouses and public housing of the time, which also provided employment. In most cases, the wife was willing and wanted to be sold to another man to distance herself from her husband. These women had veto power over potential buyers and practically chose who would buy them. In many cases, the sale was advertised in a local newspaper so that potential buyers had time to prepare. The husband would then take the woman to the cattle market and register her as a property for sale, attaching a cord around her neck, waist, or wrist. After the sale, the buyer and the seller would go to the village tavern to celebrate the successful transaction. The English custom of wife selling spread to Wales, Scotland, Australia, and the United States before dying out at the beginning of the 20th century. The last known case dates back to 1913, when a woman from Leeds claimed to have been sold by her husband to his colleague for £1. This would be the equivalent of selling your wife for £142 of today's money, or 175 American dollars. As things began to change, the first step towards acquiring rights for separated or divorced women occurred with the Custody of Infants Act of 1839, which introduced joint child custody. However, it was still at the judge's discretion, who had to evaluate whether the mother had an impeccable character. He could also decide to entrust the child to the mother if they were under 7 years old, while maintaining the father's financial responsibility. We owe this change to the writer Caroline Norton, who became famous for her personal tragedy after separating from her husband. She was effectively denied access to her 3 children, which prompted her to launch a vigorous campaign that succeeded. Following the Custody of Infants Act of 1839, the significant breakthrough occurred in 1857 with the Matrimonial Causes Act, when divorce proceedings were transferred from ecclesiastical courts to civil courts for the first time. The process was still relatively costly, but accessible to the middle class. Now, divorce was possible for the affluent, but gender differences persisted. For a man to obtain a divorce, he only had to prove his wife's adultery, while a woman had to prove that her husband had committed adultery and been involved in incest, bigamy, violence, unnatural vices, or abandonment of the marital home. At the very least, a woman who obtained a judicial separation became a femme sole with full control of her civil rights. In 1873, as a result of further pressure from Norton, Parliament extended the presumption of maternal custody until the child reached 16 years of age. Moreover, custody of children was extended to all mothers, regardless of their behaviour. In all cases of divorce or separation in 1878, following an amendment to the Married Women's Property Act, women gained the right to seek separation in cases of aggravated violence and to claim child custody. Magistrates also authorised protective orders for wives whose husbands were accused of aggravated violence. It was only in 1884 that women were elevated from the status of private property to that of distinct and independent individuals. 2 years later, they became the sole legal custodians of their children in case of the father's death. Married women could now control their property, had nearly equal status with their husbands, and held a superior female status compared to any other European country. In 1902, habitual drunkenness of the husband was also added as a ground for legal separation. As for remarriage, with access to divorce came the possibility of remarrying. But as usual, the social perceptions of male and female situations were not the same. A man who married a much younger woman did not raise eyebrows, but a woman who did the same was considered scandalous and lecherous. Usually, men were the ones who were older, as a gentleman would start looking for a wife around the age of 25, while eligible young women ranged from 17 to 23 years old. In the Victorian era, divorce was a highly stigmatised and complex process due to limited grounds, gender biases, and societal norms. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 made it slightly more accessible, but it remained costly and mostly accessible to the elite. Divorcees faced social stigma and often had to rebuild their lives in secrecy. This era's approach to divorce reflects the period's moral and social constraints and highlights the evolving norms and attitudes surrounding marriage and separation in today's society. It's astonishing to reflect on the way women were treated just 2 centuries ago, and it's alarming that even today, many countries have divorce laws that unfairly impact women's rights and well-being. And you guys, were you aware of these historical aspects of women's rights and divorce laws? And what are your thoughts on the topic?